Hello and welcome to another episode of Poetry to Your Ears. I'm Loulou.
I'm Tom.
We went to the Verve Poetry Festival in Birmingham, which is last week for us in February 2023. We took some footage, we did a little bit of interviews, there were a lot of things going on, just events like throughout 2 days for us, but it was actually across 5 days. What was there?
There was continuous open mic. So what was that? It was like just a mic that was just...
Yeah, for people to read their poetry, perform, etc. That was on the Saturday. There was a poetry Janga.
How did that work?
Yeah, so you pick up a block of the tower, and then you have to read like 2 poetry lines of a poem, and it's all like mixed up together, and then it kind of makes a unique poem every time. You
made some friends over poetry.
Yeah, it's good to like break the ice, I guess.
And they had like a typewriter.
There was called the Poetry Machine, and someone who like writes poems after like the person telling the story. It's like custom poem, etc. And it's actually a business. Like she goes around places and stuff in Birmingham. Yeah, there was a bookshop with a lot of books, some exclusive books as well, poets to sign books. There were workshops.
Yeah, workshops going on like continuously, right? They always seem to be in there whilst we went into the main event.
So there's like events and workshops at the same time, so you can't do everything. You have to choose. And we picked up the weekend pass, so we just had access to all the events. And there were events specifically for young people, anthologies, like competitions and stuff, and kind of more established poets. Reading, I guess. We were lucky enough to talk to some prominent poets on the UK poetry scene. Who did we talk to?
We spoke to Andrew McMillan,
Mm-hmm.
Eric Yip, who won the
National Poetry Competition.
And
last year, and Wayne Holloway-Smith. And we spoke to Stuart Bartholomew, who's the director and organizer of Verve Poetry Festival. I just want to give a shout out to all the interpreters who translated all the different ways of speaking English at the festival to British Sign Language. It was really impressive. On that note, we hope you enjoy our little video. We're here at the Verve Poetry Festival, and I'm with Andrew McMillan. Was it your idea to put this anthology together, 100 queer poems?
Well, so me and Mary Jean Chan worked on it together. It just struck me that over the last 10 years, certainly since I've been in poetry and publishing, there's just been this astonishing explosion and flourishing of queer poetry. And it felt time to really recognise that, whilst also putting that into a context of where that's come from and the voices who that has come out of. And so, tonight, this afternoon, for example, we heard from Golnoosh Nour or Janga from their first books, but also Gregory Woods, who's just published his 6th book. And so it was really important to lay those 2 generations together, and, all the way back to Elizabeth Bishop, to Wilfred Owen, Alfred Douglas, and forward to poets who've only just had a pamphlet out, and put all those in conversation with each other.
So did you publish historical poets as well as contemporary poets? Or?
Yeah, so the publisher wanted us to do more historical ones because it was cheaper. But we kind of decided we'd do 20th and 21st century, so they're all from the 20th or 21st century. And they had to have been published at some point in the UK, and they were kind of only parameters. And from that, it's only 100 poems. It's not canon building, it's not these are the only queer poets, it's just the beginning of a conversation. It's just 100 poems, and hopefully, the readers will read those 100 and then go on to the next 100 and the next 100 and the next 100 after that.
And in this event then, in the Verve Festival, there were 5 poets featured and reading their poetry. How did you decide who to include
or how did that work?
A really good mix, I think, that we saw this afternoon of kind of styles, of voice, of kind of generation and age, but also on a very basic level, we've got a spreadsheet of the people who've read from us from the anthology already in different places, because we don't just want the same voices, and so we're always trying to build, each time we do an event for the anthology, it's a unique event for that particular space, and so this is the only time that those 5 poets have ever read together, and hopefully that will continue to be true every time we do an event for it in the future.
And would you say this is the first queer poetry anthology, or have there been some before?
There's been many before, and so what this is the first one for 40 years to be published by what we call one of the big 5, one of the trade presses, and so the last one from a kind of big publisher was in this country, was in 1984, and it was called the Penguin Book of Homosexual Verse, and so even a book of verse feels slightly old-fashioned now, we'd say poem rather than verse, and so it felt like that was needed updating, but there's a massive history of really vital anthologies published in the US over the last few years, but in the last few decades, and also here in the last few years, just this real flourishing of new and queer anthologies. So we had Queering the Green, that's a great Irish poetry anthology. There's been Recreation from Scotland. There's 14 Poems that regularly publish mini anthologies of 14 poems, 14 queer poems every couple of months. Verve Poetry Festival have been doing their own project around kind of queer poets. I think they've just put out an anthology in Muswell Press. There's just this real resurgence, this real flourishing of queer voices, and this anthology is just one extra small part of that.
And how was that experience like for you of putting this anthology together during lockdown and follow-ups of lockdown?
I think as Mary Jean was saying, it sort of gave us a focus in lockdown. It was a kind of nice project to do. Doing permissions is one of the worst experiences of my life ever, trying to find out who owns the poets or who owns the poems. And what I really realised, I think, ultimately is that how random anthologies are. So there are some people who aren't in the anthology because they didn't answer their emails. And there are some people who aren't in the anthology because they were too expensive, dead poets. There are some people in the anthology who we just couldn't track down who owned their work. They're no longer living, but we couldn't work out who owned their work. And so, we think of these anthologies as monolithic things, whereas actually we ended up with this phrase in one of the introductions that it's all an anthology is an accumulation of the possible. That's all it can be. Yeah.
And just my last question would be, what does this book mean to you now that it's published?
It's been an incredible labour of love. I'm very, very proud of how well it's doing. It's selling incredibly well. It's in Urban Outfitters, which is a shop I'm too old to go in, but I'm told it's in there. And it's got just this real cut through with lots of different generations, which is really beautiful. And so there's a paperback coming of it in 2024, and it just feels like, out of anything I've done, I'm proudest of this, I think.
Yeah. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Nice to talk to you.
Thank you. We are at the Verve Poetry Festival, and I'm with Eric today.
Yeah, hi. Hello, nice to meet you.
We saw you yesterday at the Harana poetry event, which is a magazine for writers who write in English as a second or parallel language.
Yeah.
How did you first get involved with them in the first place?
So actually, I think for me, Kostya actually messaged me on Twitter, and I already knew about Harana as a magazine. I think they're doing great things. And then Kostya sort of invited me to submit, and I handed in a few poems, and one of the poems that was published was the first poem that I read yesterday. It's sort of about translation and the sort of actually the untranslatability between certain ideas in English and Cantonese.
If asked to explain 人情味, I'd point to the last cart noodle shop in Cowan City. No one knows placeholder in Cantonese. At the party, I am Jimmy Carter's interpreter. This joke is untranslatable. Please laugh to save face. There is a sentence stranded behind this one. I dissolve my tongue in another language. The customs officer relaxes his scowl. How is your grandmother? How I split grandmother in two. Lai Lai, Paw Paw. One dead, the other waiting. A life lost and the saying, "Dear reader, sometimes I think you don't know what I mean if you know what I mean."
So that was how it started, basically. Yeah.
So do you write poetry mainly in English or in Cantonese, or a mix of the both? Or?
So when I started writing poetry when I was like 16 or 17, I wrote in English because that was the language that helped me express myself better. It's very strange considering that Cantonese is my mother tongue, but I think English being a language that was not used in my daily life, that helped me sort of gain a sense of security because it wasn't colloquial to me at the time, and it was just something that was existed on the page. And so if I wrote about sort of personal stuff or things that made me feel more vulnerable, that sort of confinement to the page makes me feel like more able to be able to express that, I think. Yeah.
I really relate to that because I'm French as well and I write poetry in English. So I do feel that kind of freedom in the English language because of that distance maybe and that ability to like play with words. But I was just wondering a bit more about your story. So you moved from Hong Kong to the UK, maybe for your studies or for your studies. And you were the youngest ever winner of the national poetry competition. How was that like for you? You know?
It was the most surprising thing to ever happen to me because I mean when I first arrived in the UK, poetry was still this very private thing to me. And then actually when I arrived, it was sort of a shock because I had never been in the UK, I'd never been in Europe. So I just came here and I think that sort of change, that shift in perspective gave me the impulse to maybe just to write just like submit my poem somewhere. And then I just Googled UK poetry competitions and the first one that came up was National Poetry Competition. And I saw that it mentioned that the 3 judges would read every single poem. And I thought, cool, the judges will read my poem, that's great. And then I submitted in October, and I actually forgot about, I didn't even remember that I submitted. But then in February I got like a call. I think I didn't really see it as a big, I was very happy, but I didn't really see it as like a super, super big deal. And because I was not really comfortable with the idea that poetry, now other people are going to know about this. So I kept it a secret. And actually it was sort of all happened in a blur, the sort of announcement, it went public and then the poem went viral in Hong Kong, and my friends and family read the poem. I mean, it's a very strange feeling, but I think in the end, the best thing that came out of it was being able to meet other poets, to meet other people who read poetry, and to be reminded that it's not a purely solitary endeavor, that at every moment we're sort of influenced by the people we read and the people we sort of read with, if that makes sense.
And how was that like to hear from your friends and family about your poem, who you didn't necessarily want to share to the whole world? And was that fear, maybe debunked in the reality? How was that like for you?
Yeah, I think it's a pretty complex feeling because in my poems, there is sort of a play on the idea of being autobiographical. It's not necessarily autobiographical, but the sort of mode of the poem is sort of in that sort of space. So my family, they read the poem, but they didn't really comment on it. They were like, cool, I'm proud of you. And I think both of us prefer to keep it that way, in the sense that I wouldn't really want my family to talk about the poems because that sort of breaches the membrane between what's happening inside the poem and what's happening in my life. And I think it's very important to keep one's own life outside of poetry, if that makes sense, because it's so easy to be consumed by it, by writing. If you write about your life, then your life becomes part of your writing, and when you're disillusioned with your writing, you become disillusioned with your life, which I think is very dangerous. So I think it's great that to my family, I'm not a poet, I'm just a son or a brother, and to my friends, I'm just a friend. And I think that's very important to keep oneself grounded. Yeah.
Li, tear. On a bench in the laundromat, I see him slumped, sobbing, his back reflected in the washer's porthole. Inside the machine, a deep, irregular whir, the metal drum tossing loose socks, shirts, invisible limbs. Never have I seen a man break so completely, as if a vast crevice had unzipped his life. Later, hauling a warm bag of clothes up uneven flights, I recall my father's woolly voice, our last meal together, the ceiling fan chopping light above us, when he asked if I would ever forgive him, how slowly he took off his glasses and wept.
That was your first poem published in a way. That's mad, right? And you said you found a community out of it. And what do you want out of the future for your poetry work? What do you imagine?
I think for me right now, I just focus on the next poem, because I remember, I don't know who said this exactly, but I'm paraphrasing here, but it's like, an artist is only as good as their last work, which might be a bit hyperbolic, but I think that attitude of there's always the next poem to write, that keeps me going. And a lot of people ask me, like, do you have a pamphlet manuscript or something? And I would say that I don't think I'm in any rush. And to me, publication has never really been the goal. It's only sort of a bonus, because I think it was important for me to write in solitude for 2 to 3 years before like all of this happened, because that solidified that sort of determination for me to write only for myself, to write because I enjoy the process of writing. I enjoy the process of reading other people's work, and I think that's very important. So as for what lies in the future, I trust future Eric to choose that for me, I think. Yeah.
That's lovely, yeah. And if people hear this interview and they really want to, check out your work, where can they do that?
So I have a website. It's eric-yip.com, but you can also find me on Twitter, on Instagram. It's basically like Eric Yip. Yeah, but thanks a lot for the interview.
Thank you so much. It was a lovely interview. Thanks. Nice talking to you.
Nice to meet you.
Nice meeting you. Okay.
We're here with Wayne Holloway-Smith, and poet and sometimes editor as well of Outspoken Press.
Yeah. And now Poetry Review. Obviously.
How did you get involved with the Verve Festival in the first place then?
Stuart, last year I did a reading at Blackwell's in Manchester, and I was reading this thing called Lobsters, which was a longish poem that I wrote and published with McKenna Books. And Stuart was there, and then he just came up to me afterwards and said, can I pay you to read that at Verve next year, or can I pay you more to write a new thing? And I was like, well, I do like more money.
Yeah.
I wrote a new thing.
Nice, yeah. So that was the rabbit that you performed today?
Rabbit box, yeah. Sad among the hurting windows, gone bad town, bricked up eyes and punch drunk, gone bad town. Its extant trees unfold the air so gentle where, in this gone town, timid little thing, gingering, deeply breathes my lungs, to outgrow its own shrinking. I am the rabbit, king of nervous laughter, touched in the wits, a tiny body in the bathtub, or caught too young in the guttural clench of a small town wind. Blue plastic bags sucked around the feet of men, and their laughter was bigger than God hurts. If you broke your fingers drunk on glue in the backs of bus stations, born into the terrible alleluia of language, then you know my name.
Yeah, so people who haven't been aware of your stuff before, you kind of you're in the kind of long poem form at the moment. That's what we touched upon in the talk that you just did now, the reading that you just did now. So with this, why did you choose to do it in that form, rather than the shorter form that's more common?
I don't know. I think it's just that it's not like I chose to do it in a particular form. It's just like, as you're writing, the thing kind of works itself out as it, you know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
I have no real idea how long something's going to go on for. Like, I don't know what I'm going to say. And the poems aren't like necessarily about something, or like, and I certainly don't know how it's going to end. So like, it's really just sort of working it out line by line sometimes. Enjoy writing that line, I'll write another one.
Yeah, and how long did it take you to write this one? Because
this one, I don't think it's finished yet. I don't know, like 2 years.
Really, that long?
Yeah, I mean, I care about stuff, and and I'm trying to, but like it's not like I got up and wrote 9 to 5 every day. Yeah, inspired, or just like when I've got something new to do with it. Like sometimes I don't really, you sit with something for a while, you don't really understand where it's going next, and then you think, oh shit, yeah, no, it's that, or like, oh, actually it's not going anywhere next, I need to take something out,
Yeah.
And then it kind of unlocks a new bit, and then you write for a little bit, see what it looks like on the page.
Yeah, so that's, I mean, you kind of answered my question here, which is how do you edit a long poem, right?
Yeah.
And it's like, it sounds like it's a journey across a year or whatever.
Yeah, well, I think what I start doing is like editing as I go. So sometimes it's like, not when I'm say writing, and you're not really writing new things, you're just like rewriting the bits that you've already written.
Yeah.
Sometimes you read it out and you just keep reading it until like you sort of automatically say the next line. Do you know what I mean? So you're like saying, you read as far as you've got, and then all of a sudden you're sort of writing the next bit or something like that.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I don't really know why.
It was incredible, the poem that you did today. And so, I mean, when is it coming out then? When can we pour over it? Because, hearing you deliver it, it's great. It'd be really nice to have a chance to sit with it and really go for it. That's how I read poetry.
I don't know. I've got to, I'll finish it, and then I'll just give it to my agent and see.
Yeah.
What happens.
Okay, well.
Well, Blood Axe normally publish my stuff, so perhaps they'll be interested. Like I don't. Hopefully some people will.
Yeah. The other thing is we spoke to Katie O'Prey, that you helping them in their poetry, crafting it, really inspiring them.
So I met Katie because they were a student of mine at the University of Hertfordshire.
Oh, right.
So that's when we started like working together.
Yeah.
And then they stuck their manuscripts in the mix for me to consider for Outspoken, and it was just obvious that it's one of the best things. So yeah, we worked together on that for about a year, but we've been working together before that because I was literally paid to work with her. Very good writer, and very, very young as well. So it's like incredibly exciting to see where someone like Katie might go next. And also, I hope people do buy that book, because it's
Apricot, yeah. Get it, it's really good. It's the best thing I read of the year. Seriously, yeah. For me, yeah.
That's good. Yeah, I think more people would think that if more people bought it.
Yeah, it's incredible. Yeah, great. And does doing the editing, does that help you with your writing process? Do you think in general?
Nah, probably not.
No.
No, it's a lot. It's a lot of work, and you're kind of like often. It takes up your own kind of creative energy to sort of other people's work. If you do it seriously, which I always want to do, and the same I think with the poetry review stuff to a certain extent. You got to really take that stuff seriously. It's people's work.
Yeah.
Potentially careers that they're looking to sort of form, or they already have formed. So, it deserves your attention to the. To the highest sort of possibility that you can give it, and that's tiring.
Yeah,
it's quite a tiring practice.
So, thank you for taking the time to talk to us, man. Last obligatory question: how did you get into poetry in the first place? Because you mentioned that you in this last reading you mentioned you grew up in a house without books. Yeah. So what got you into poetry in the first place? Yeah, but we want the honest answer, man.
So when I moved to London, all of my friends that I made were very cool. They all dressed a certain way. They were all artists, or they were all in bands. And I was like, shit. In order to dress a certain way, you kind of have to have a thing. So, what can my thing be? I don't know. Poetry doesn't really exist anymore. Maybe I'll just be, the first contemporary poet.
Yeah.
Wear a hat with a feather in or something.
Yeah.
Or an interesting pair of pointy shoes or something like that. So that's why I did it. And then I suddenly realised there's actually quite a lot of contemporary poets, and they're all some of them are quite interesting. So then I had to sort of go to school and learn how to do it. And I did feel like when I maybe kind of intuitively that like it was something that I wanted to do. So I kept kind of working very hard at it. Still working hard at it, try and get as good as I can.
Yeah, and it shows, man. Yeah, I've really enjoyed it today. Really enjoyed seeing you. This is the first time I've actually seen any of your poetry, believe it or not. Éloïse has, read some stuff before, but the first time I've been exposed to it. So, yeah, we're looking forward to it coming out. If you want to shout out any socials or anything that you want to do. Okay, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us, man. Appreciate that.
Hi, I'm Loulou and we're here with Stuart, the director of Verve Poetry Festival. Can you tell us a bit more about how you started, creating the Verve Poetry Festival, and you're the co-founder. Who did you create it with?
So I created it with Cynthia Miller, who's a poet with Nine Arches Press. She used to live in Birmingham. I used to run the big Waterstones in Birmingham that you might have seen on High Street. And while I was running that, we decided we wanted to do a poetry festival. I think Cynthia made me decide that somehow, because she didn't work for Waterstones. And so we did our first two in that shop. So we had kind of maximum 100 seats, and it was very homemade, but really good. And I think we discovered there what the kind of kernel of Verve is about. We aimed to be for this city, so we needed to be multicultural. We needed to show all the kinds of poetry, not just page poetry. We needed to do a lot more with performance poetry. A lot of poetry festivals are rural and intense and quite white. Cynthia's got Malaysian heritage and went to a few and felt quite isolated. So we knew that we had to make that a choice. And a lot of poetry festivals, they have one performance event and the rest are all sitting around with books. So we wanted that to be a much bigger part of what we did. So at least half the events are kind of performance, and then the other half are kind of more thoughtful events.
So you've been doing that for like 5 years now?
Yeah, this is our sixth one.
Sixth one, yeah. And how did you do it during the lockdowns and the whole pandemic period?
Okay. We didn't do it. So we had one in February 2020, about 3 weeks before the lockdown. We missed 2021, partly because I didn't want to apply. We get funded by the Arts Council, and I felt like I had a job. I didn't need to earn money to live, whereas a lot of artists did. So I felt like they needed the Arts Council money more than I did. So we took a year off, but I don't like taking years off, and we came back in 2022. And it was probably still quieter than this year. People weren't quite ready, but each year since has felt more and more busy. So it's been a good year this year.
Yeah. And how do you balance having Birmingham poets with more nationwide poets? What's the programmation strategy like?
Yeah. So I think I'm not terribly focused on Birmingham these days. I think the festival quite naturally becomes more national the longer it goes on. So on the first Thursday, it tends to be local people coming. We have an open mic. We involve people that way. A lot of the Birmingham poets have been on a lot at Verve. So there's two on tonight. There's Greg Ledbetter and Zaffar are both Birmingham heritage. We make sure they're represented, but I think it's more for the Birmingham learners, the Birmingham people who want to learn poetry or be poets, and so I want to show them the best poetry there is. So that could be from anywhere really, and we've had a couple of people in from the States this time. Lots of Scottish poets. what's going on? So just, but quite a mix generally.
What does this festival mean to you?
That's the biggest question ever. It means everything to me. I think we've been really surprised at how, quickly it landed. I think how quickly it's become valued, how many people feel it's quite an essential festival. I think, it means the world to me, but I also feel that we're learning all the time. And so we'd like to try, we had our first film poetry event this time. We had our absurd all-day open mic, which no one else has, but why would you? But then I think it was good, and I think it will grow. So we are trying different things all the time, I just think we're still the only poetry festival doing what we do, and so that's why I think people come so far to come here.
Yeah, we really enjoyed it.
Great.
Yeah, we travelled from Crawley, to Birmingham, it was really lovely. Well, thank you so much for talking to us, Stuart.
Nice to speak to you.
That was Verve Festival 2023. Thanks for checking it out. If you want to find out any more about the poets featured or Verve Festival itself, check out the website, Verve's website, in the description below.
And if you want more Poetry Tours content, just subscribe to wherever you're checking this out and check out just our other content. And don't hesitate to get in touch with us. We'd love to hear from you.
Catch you next time.
See you guys.
C'est la nuit. Pluie. Les lumières du cinéma se répètent par terre. La foule sort, se disperse. Restent deux femmes et un parapluie au coin de la rue. Papotage féminin. La brune rit, secoue ses cheveux. De l'autre côté de la rue, l'homme les observe, de loin, de dos.
Thank you for listening to Poetry to Your Ears. This podcast is published as a newsletter on Substack. All of our content is published for free, but if you would like to support our work, you can become a paid subscriber. This will help us support transcripts for the deaf and hard of hearing community, and anyone who would benefit from reading the podcast alongside hearing it. You can also support us for free by rating the show on Spotify and Apple Podcast, or writing a review on Apple Podcast. Share the show with your friends, fellow poets, and poetry lovers. If you want to interact with us, you can follow us on @poetry2yourears on Instagram and @poetry2 your ears on Twitter, or you can also write a comment on Substack. Until next time!